so that we can use that as a resource on our website. Thank you all for coming today. This is the penultimate session now of our Valuing Practice Education conference. And it's a priority of the teaching partnership, as I've said before, to really value and promote the role and the contribution that practice educators make to social work education and to the profession as a whole as well. So we've put on this range of workshops specifically for practice educators to support your learning and development, and for prospective practice educators as well. So it's been a really fabulous mixed bag of sessions so far, and I know this one is going to be fantastic as well. So can I welcome Jenni McCabe, who's here to speak to us about neurodiversity and how we can support students who are neurodivergent as well. And a big thank you for stepping in quite last minute, Jenni, due to Deb Solomon being unwell, and yeah, stepping in with what looks like a fantastic presentation. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through. Thanks, Jenni.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Just checking that you can all hear me and see me. I'm just about to share my presentation. You will note that it has live subtitles on it. So just a heads up that it sometimes kind of grapples with my regional accent a wee bit, shall we say. So it can come up some very interesting alternatives to what I'm actually saying. So apologies for that in advance. But I'm just going to have a go at sharing my screen. Okay, Deborah, just double checking that this is working.
Yes, it is. We can see that.
That's fab. Thank you very much. So, okay, as I said, my name is Jenni McCabe. I'm not Deb Solomon, as lovely as she is. I have been a social worker for what feels like forever, a practice educator, and I'm currently working with social work students on a master's programme. And another thing to know about me is that I am autistic. So I'm coming to you with a little bit of lived experience from a variety of different perspectives. Okay, so let's see, what am I hoping that you will achieve from today? I am hoping that you will achieve awareness of key terms in relation to neurodiversity. I'd also hope that you'll begin to develop some understanding of different aspects of neurodivergence and how that could impact on learning, practice and employment when we're thinking about our social work students. And I would love you to begin to explore ways to develop your allyship with your autistic and other neurodivergent colleagues and students. So what do I want to achieve though? Because I guess this is what I'm hoping is we've got a little bit of a collaborative space going on here. I'm really hoping that I'm going to be able to share useful information with you and not info dump too much, which I can do. It's one of my lovely autistic, I'd like to think, strengths. Others may think a different way. However, I'm also going to remain mindful that everyone may be on a little different place in their inclusion and understanding journey here. I'm also really mindful that I'm probably not the only neurodivergent social worker in the room. And some of this may feel a little bit kind of close to home and personal. So I guess my invitation to you, if that is the case, is just please take time to step out if you want to, or please contribute. Love to hear your views. And that's the other thing. I'm here and I'm going to stay in my own lane. Okay, I am autistic. I am also ADHD, and I probably have a good dose of dyslexia kicking in here as well. But I am coming with my experiences both as a practitioner and personally in terms of my neurodivergence. So I can't tell you everybody's experiences. However, what I do want to try and do is advocate the voices of difference within this session. And last but not least, I would really love to connect with you, and I'd like to learn with you. And as I say, I'd really love you to be part of this just now. So please do share your thoughts as we go. Okay, so part of this session, I would like to create and offer an invitation of a brave space. So I'm going to give you a moment just to read the poem that's on the slide. Okay, so why am I showing you this? Okay, there's a reason. So I'm hoping that this session is a brave space, but also we think about brave spaces when we're working with students in general, but particularly our neurodivergent students. There is something about moving beyond the comfortable in a brave space versus a safe space, where we have to really kind of challenge our own ideas, views, assumptions, biases that come from a whole range of places. But it's an active place, it's an active space. So we want to be trauma informed first and foremost. We want to have opportunity for active reflection, which I hope you'll get today. Again, opportunity for connection and opportunity for growth. These are absolutely essential. And how are we going to get there? Well, curiosity is key. So questions are essential. Please ask them. But so is listening and attending. Okay, so please could you do that today with not just myself, but with each other. There's a couple of activities I'll be asking you to do. Challenge, both in terms of self or others, is embraced as long as it is respectful, of course. And I guess the key thing in a brave space as well is ownership of action. What are we going to do about what we're learning here? Okay, so let's carry on. So the first thing I'd like you to think about is, what do we mean when we say neurodiversity? So I'd like you to take a minute to think about what neurodiversity means to you. And please, can you write your ideas in the chat? So just a couple of minutes to do this activity. Any ideas what neurodiversity is? Thanks, Deborah. The different way people respond to the world around them. Oh, yeah. That not everyone thinks in the same way. Thank you, Roz. Liz, you've put different ways of thinking about things. Sure. And oh gosh, you're all coming on in now. This is great. Where have I got to? Diversity based on the way brain processes information. Oh, you guys are informed. This is great. Different ways of thinking, of understanding and processing information, diversity, different ways of understanding and responding to the world. Sarah, fantastic response there. And Karen, different ways of learning, absolutely. So, and I've got Christine, difference in thinking and behaviour, whole range of differences in the way we think and do things, different ways to function. Megan, yes. So that's an interesting one. We would get to that in a wee bit later. Yeah, and Margaret, you've kind of said something similar, and I'm just going through them now. Not everyone absorbs and processes information in the same way or learns the same way. Absolutely, Ruth. Yep. Difference in the interpretation of environmental stimuli, and Sarah, can be a strength as well. Bang on. Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. That was great. So, excuse me. Yeah, so why am I asking you this? I guess it's because neurodiversity is a term that kind of gets bandied around quite a lot, especially more recently, and yet people can use it to mean different things. So I would just try and break it down slightly, and we look at it within the neurodiversity paradigm. So neurodiversity it's a fact, it's a biological fact. Okay, humans are neurodiverse. Our brains are all generally there's normal variances in the way that people's brains work. However, some people's brains function differently than others, and the neurodiversity paradigm takes that idea and suggests that we have different neurotypes, and that each neurotype is a valid diversity identity alongside others such as ethnicity and gender. So it's saying it's an identity. These people can they're neurodivergent, so how they think differently, which is what you guys have picked up, is part of their identity, and it is something that needs to be valued and validated. So it's a bit of a social construct here. So the neurodiversity movement also argues that neuronormal or neurotypical is a social construct, and there's no right or correct neurodevelopmental way to think, but I guess it's the dominant discourse in society, or the cognitive authority, if you want to call it, that determines what that is. And they also argue that through stigmatization of difference or less than is what causes disability and trauma for neurodivergent people. And that's their argument. So the neurodiversity movement is, I guess, a social justice kind of value-based stance around neurodiversity. Okay, so when we talk about neurotypes, what are we talking about? Okay, so a neurotypical person, if we were thinking within the neurodiversity paradigm, is a person whose brain works in accordance with the normative standard of the general population. That's not necessarily the majority, but whoever holds most power in that kind of dominant discourse. Whereas neurodivergence or neurodivergent people are people whose brains work differently from the general population, or the majority of the dominant kind of discourse, I guess. And this is how, so if you're neurodivergent, it can include how we process information and how we respond to the world. So all of the things that you'd suggested in the chat totally relate to this. So when we talk about neurodivergence, what on earth are we talking about? Are we, who are we talking about? What kinds of neurodivergence are we talking about? So I've added some symbols, and I'd be really curious to know if people know what they stand for. So let's try this one. Let's see. So if I point to the gold infinity symbol, do we know what that represents? Anybody know what that represents? I don't mind how you answer. It can be out loud or in chat. No, Cecilia, excellent. That's fine. That's quite. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so let me go through them, shall we? And we'll just see if we do, because it's really interesting how well, I'll talk about this in a sec. So the gold infinity symbol, which is up in your right-hand corner, relates to autism. Okay, the butterfly, lovely, beautiful, multicolored butterfly, is ADHD. And the ADHD Society has that on all of their kind of websites, etc. The stick-like figure in yellow is dyspraxia. Dyspraxia Society has that there. And the one down at the bottom, which very helpfully has the wording in there for you, is Tourette's syndrome. But the one in the bottom right corner, the circle with what looks like 4 circles within that, is actually representing dyslexia. It's this lovely little clever one, which is basically a P, a D, a B, and a Q, all together wrapped up in a circle. And look how difficult they are to distinguish within that. I really like that one, I have to say, personally. Okay, so enough of that one, but it just goes to show that you know, there's quite a lot of symbolism and representation within the neurodivergent community with different neurodivergences. So that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? And here we are. Here's some more kind of examples of that. So there's only a few listed in here. I really could go on, and you will get a copy of all these slides, by the way. And there's a lot longer list that I've provided in the notes around what could be considered neurodivergence. And another thing to just be aware of is you can have neurodivergence that you're born with, and you could also have acquired neurodivergence, such as acquired brain injury, for example. Dementia is another one, where it's essentially to something that it has difference in your brain that causes you to think and process differently. Okay, so I guess I have a little question for you, and if anybody wants to be brave and answer. My question is there anything that has surprised you so far? Liz, would PTSD be neurodivergence? Yeah, and especially complex PTSD, I would argue is, and it's certainly been included within the neurodiversity community. But yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, is there any other questions before I move on at this point? Oh, lovely. We do have space. Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, Jenni, if there's like overlap with sort of mental health sort of conditions, and sort of is there a sort of clear line, I guess, between sort of neurodivergent and mental health diagnoses?
It's really interesting because what you find, especially in the autism community, you'll find, and especially with women, that there's a lot of people that have experienced misdiagnosis. So, for example, there are people who may have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder who have later been identified and diagnosed as autistic. So there's a lot of overlap and experiences of symptoms, I guess, and what that means for people. But equally, if you talk within kind of the neurodivergent community, so for example, I'm part of neurodivergent therapist groups and things like that, and they will argue that that schizophrenia is within neurodivergence, and other kinds of mental health identities, yes, would sit within that because of how you process the world. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
And Sarah, yes, absolutely. There is so the argument is the whole point, and so Judy Singer was the person who originally came up with the idea of neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And both she and another kind of prominent name, Nick Walker, who I would absolutely recommend you go and look up and read some of her stuff, argue that kind of neurodivergence shouldn't be used as a gatekeeping kind of term, that really anybody who identifies and experiences brain changes, being able to barriers to kind of processing within kind of the typical environment, and should really be considered. So yeah, so a kind of complex and a kind of severe trauma really could, and especially in early childhood, really could lead to people identifying neurodivergent. Okay, if it's all right with you guys, I'm just going to move on. But okay, and this kind of leads me into this. So there really is a sense of culture within kind of neurodivergent communities and the communities within neurodivergent communities. So for example, autism has a very strong sense of culture. within its community, and I guess there's ADHD is certainly a growing one too. And one of the things, I guess, part of culture is the language that we use, and it is just really a note about identity first versus person first language. So in the neurodivergent communities, generally the preference is for identity first, so I am. And the reason for that mainly is because it's incredibly difficult to separate your neurodivergence from you. You know, where does one start and the other one stop? We just don't know. And equally, I guess it's an activity to really kind of challenge the stigma associated with a lot of neurodivergence. But, and it is a caveat to this, we really shouldn't kind of take this as given. We need to think about cultural considerations. For example, where person first language is perhaps how generally kind of that cultured language is formed and how it's structured. And also personal preferences. Different people really do have different ideas on how they would, whether they would like to say, for example, I am autistic or I have autism. It's a personal preference. But in general, the community as a whole would ask that people consider identity first language as your initial approach, and then please amend and correct as advised. And then the other aspect to just really think about is diagnosis versus identity focus. And this is really, really relevant for a lot of your students. Okay, there's a lot of students that will be coming into you who are maybe only just beginning to identify or develop an understanding that they have or may have neurodivergence. And where you're at in your own kind of relationship with that really kind of has a bearing on how you would describe it and how you would view your strengths and your qualities and what's getting in the way. So as practitioners, I would be really asking you to move away from what we know as a medical model, so where it's a kind of pathologizing, deficit-based approach and language to disability generally, neurodivergence especially, and consider a more social justice model, the social model of disability, where not only are we presuming competence and focusing on qualities and strengths as a baseline, but we're also considering that the impact of the environment and other factors around the person is impacting on their disability and their needs. And then the other thing that we really so important is that intersectionality matters. There is definitely no such thing as a single story, and especially in relation to neurodivergence. So I talked about diagnosis. Well, diagnosis is a privilege, and it is not something that is open to all of us. I'll give you an example. If we think about gender and autism, is my area, and in my lifetime, it was thought that autism didn't happen in girls generally. It's very rare. It was something that you wouldn't consider, and you're more likely to go down a mental health route in terms of considering what was going on for a person rather than thinking about autism. So you've got a lot of late diagnosed women and girls in relation to autism, for example, ADHD as well. You know, the consideration of women in ADHD, something that is really underrepresented and still got a long way to go. But we also need to think about ethnicity. So, and our assumptions and biases in relation to ethnicity and behaviour, ethnicity and mental health, ethnicity and neurodiversity. It is a real barrier to diagnosis and to understanding what's going on for that person. Poverty is a huge impact on whether you can get diagnosed or the support needs that you've got. Geographically, I mean, supports are a postcode lottery. They really are. So there's all of these things that, and I haven't even spoken about age, that can get in the way of people getting a diagnosis, getting support, or really getting the opportunity to understand what neurodivergent means for them in terms of their own identity. Okay. Yeah, there's a little bit more in the slides for you that you can kind of take away and read as well. So I won't kind of go into this as much. Okay, so and then just another little reminder. So we do have neurodivergent service users that we work with. We have neurodivergent students, we have neurodivergent practice educators, and we have colleagues. So when we're talking about working with students today, please be mindful that this could relate across the whole kind of social work profession and the spaces that we work in. Okay, so I would argue that social work needs neurodiversity. And why would I argue that, you would say? Okay, we come with a heap of strengths. We really do. And if we're starting with the strength base, in terms of thinking about your students, for example, what could these look like? Well, one of the things that we really align with, a lot of us in the neurodivergent community, is a passion for social justice. It's great. And we find that people are drawn to social work because we align with the values that social work espouses. This is a very, very busy slide, and I do apologise for that, but I was hoping to try and kind of just really cram in what I think are some key strengths in relation to us. So the heart, I'm arguing, is the passion for social justice. And it's not just about social justice. It's fairness, it's respect, it's equity. These are all high priorities. And we look at it more kind of broadly and also kind of locating with the individual. And then there's that really kind of that very kind of blurry looking person that looks like it's right down a tunnel. This is my symbolism for intense focus. And we call that monotropism. And it basically means that we can deep dive into an issue with really intense exploration and detail. Now that can be a hindrance as much as a help. So it's great if you're really wanting to try and understand particular issues, theories, approaches, or topics. But it can also get in the way of us changing tasks and focus we want to do, kind of shifting our thinking away from one thing to another can be a bit of a challenge. But our understanding and knowledge is really enhanced, and this can benefit assessment, planning, and developing trusting relationships with families that we work with. What else? Well, and this is very much from an autism perspective that I'm taking this one, but analysis and pattern identifications, and that's the graphs that we've got there. So I honestly do an analytical chronology. I really do. I love being able to kind of, again, monotropism, getting deep down into where are the patterns, what does that mean, what could that mean then in terms of what I need to do next. And I love to consider that as a key strength as a social worker. But alongside that, and that's the picture at the bottom, is solution seeking. That's the magnifying glass one. So we're not just problem identifiers, but we do have a desire to seek out what could be effective or what could work for others. And we've got a real motivation to really try and find that out. Some of us are really good at kind of going away and doing that individually, but some of us really want to seek out the collaborative working approach and work together to develop approaches and strategies. So I'm challenging a wee bit the myth, especially with autism and ADHD, people in terms of this idea that we're not particularly sociable. If there's a need, if we see the value in it, I guess, then team working is really, really effective with us. And then the wee ones on a pile of books looking over the fence is curiosity. Now, this can be perceived as asking all the awkward questions, but really we're asking the difficult questions because we need it to make sense, and we want to look beyond the surface and explore issues, perhaps beyond where anybody else has gone. You know, so we really want to unpick, explore, and really seek to understand what's going on for ourselves and for other people, which I think is a great skill in social work. Gives us great analytical skills, and the other thing that offers us is that we can challenge. So that might not always be seen as a skill for others, but we can effectively challenge, and that could be in terms of risk, in terms of risk management. So yeah, I do believe that if you've got a student who's like that, if there's a way to harness that, fantastic. And then last but not least, what you see is what you get. And I'm talking very much here from an autism perspective, but generally we're straight talking, and we like clear and concise messaging. We can be perceived as blunt, perhaps, and certainly if you're not understanding the context that I'm coming from, and I'm not understanding the context that you're coming from, that can certainly come and be perceived as rude or challenging or awkward. And I guess the other thing to say is I can't lie. It's really hard. It's very difficult to be economical with the truth. So I guess you know what I'm saying, or you know what I'm thinking. And I know from my own kind of lived experience that was one of the feedbacks from families that I worked with, that they always knew in terms of where I stood with things. So I guess I'm using some of my own kind of insights and experiences here to just really try and, I hope, bring to the surface where neurodivergent thinking and processing can be a real strength, especially in the social work field. But it might not necessarily be wholly apparent in the first instance. Okay, so moving on. It's not that easy being neurodivergent. We come with these great strengths, but as is already kind of mentioned slightly, they're not always perceived as strengths, and we don't always perceive them as strengths either. I guess as we are grappling with a whole load of other things around us. And whilst I'm focusing on autism a lot in this aspect of the training, I'd really like you to think, and if you've got students in mind, please think of them or other people. What does this mean for this person? Because a lot of this is really resonates with a lot of other neurodivergent people who may not be autistic. And one of the big key things is sensory. So sensory overload is a huge issue for a lot of neurodivergent people, and can get in the way of our everyday experience. And I sometimes call this the trauma of the everyday, because you can't escape it. And I guess while I'm talking about this, I'd also like to think about your workplace environment and what that feels like. You know, what are the lights like? What is the noise levels like? You know, what is what are the colors in the room? What, you know, are they really, really bright? Are they kind of nondescript? And I kind of use an example of all the colours in my local authority that I used to work in most recently. The colours of the carpets were always the same. And it actually was, because it was all open plan and everything, it was really difficult for me to work out where one aspect of my workspace started and where it stopped. And I used to try and measure it by the change in colour of the carpet. That was how I kind of worked out when I'd moved away from a team and was coming in and was going into somewhere else. Because in some aspects of the building, the carpet changed colour, but in some aspects they didn't. And I used to get really lost, even though I'd worked there for so many years. It was really difficult for me to do. Because I couldn't identify other kind of obvious landmarks, so to speak. So, and a lot of the time people who really struggle with sensory overload or sensory issues that kind of get in the way, will either really try and put up with it, which can have a huge impact on the mental health, or they'll try to avoid or escape it. So if you have a student who is not really coming into the team space, you might want to think about whether there's some sensory things that are going on there, or someone who leaves really suddenly, whether that's regularly at the end of the day or where there's a big activity going on or something like that. The other thing that I want to kind of talk about is on my list is communication. So I take an autism slant here again, but communication is a huge aspect within neurodivergence, and not necessarily understanding in terms of communication, but being understood. So, or being able to unpick meaning within what's being communicated. If we think about dyslexia, for example, you know, how things are written, it's really difficult to be able to understand the message that's coming your way. And think emails, a very wordy narrative type email is very, very difficult if you're dyslexic to try and unpick and pull out the key messages. And in fact, that's in a lot of neurodivergent folk. I, for one, really struggle with that. I'd much prefer a bullet point approach, for example. But in the spoken word, it's just as relevant here as well. And it is what you are trying to say and what other people are trying to say. We sometimes get a disconnect between neurotypical people and neurodivergent people. And Damien Milton, who is an autistic researcher, coined the concept, the double empathy problem. And I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but essentially what Milton was saying was often deficit-based approaches would assume that the person who's neurodivergent, in this case the autistic person, was the person who had the problem or the difficulty in being able to understand what people were saying. But research showed that actually autistic people could understand other autistic people really well. And in fact, that extended to other kind of neurodivergent people. It was when there was a neurodivergent person, or autistic person, communicating with a neurotypical person where you had the mix match, where it didn't work. And the double empathy problem is suggesting that it is not the autistic person who is failing to understand or have empathy with the other person and what's being said, but actually the neurotypical person is not perhaps empathizing as much with what the autistic person is sitting with. So this suggests that it is a two-pronged, it's a twofold approach. Both people need to do the work. Rather than just assuming that it's the autistic person that can't do something. Actually, the barrier may lie with you. You may not have communicated what you thought in a way that could be understood by the other person. And the really simple solution to that is to check it out with each other, is to take time and effort to fully understand what works for the other person. Okay. Now, when all of this is going on for a neurodivergent person, it takes up a heck of a lot of energy. Like, it is hard work navigating through the everyday of the onslaught of windows with no curtains or blinds, so the sunlight comes in and it really hurts your eyes. An open plan office that has loads of people talking and phone calls and the noises of phones ringing and all of these kinds of things. And then you've got I don't know, just not being able to sit with your back to the wall was one of the things that I really struggle with, sitting in open space, because I have a thing that in relation to proprioception, which is a sense around knowing where your body is in space. And a lot of people who are ADHDers may have this as well, or dyspraxia is another one, where you can't locate where you are, what you're doing. So you almost need something to regulate yourself by pushing back against you. So for example, I like seats that have a back or are to a wall, so I'm not sitting behind kind of empty space. Is very helpful for me. So you're dealing with all of that and really struggling with communicating and understanding what people want of you. Millions of emails that are like so long, you know, or case notes that are for forever, like an assessment in their own right. Your energy levels get really, really depleted. So having an awareness of that as a practice educator is invaluable. But the biggest barrier for a neurodivergent person is attitudes, bias, and stigma. And I guess this is a big ask from me for you guys, is to really think about what you think about disability in general and social work, bias towards competence. What are we meaning when we're talking about competence and capability? Are we thinking within the PCFs? And whilst I'm not saying that you all are, you know, you all have these big assumptions and biases, it is the messages that society offer you, that the social work profession offers you from your own kind of backgrounds and experiences and growing up, that really lay the layers of ideas that we have around neurodivergence and especially and disability. And within the social work profession, disability is a very, very hidden thing. You know, there's, you know, whether we like it or not, there's a lot of stigma around, you know, and I'm going to include mental health in this, around whether we are good enough, you know, whether we've got what it takes to be a social worker. So there's some research around this that shows that people will not disclose their disability, or a lot of people will not disclose their disability for fear of stigma and bias in the workplace. And you may find that you have some students where you're maybe wondering, you know, if they are neurodivergent and they haven't disclosed. That could be a reason, that they are really, really worried about what that will then mean in terms of how they are assessed, of how you respond to them, and later on kind of going into employment. So we'll go into a little bit of detail around what you can do in a wee bit, but please just be really, really aware this is a huge issue with social work students. Okay. And here's why. All right. So here are some quotes that I have pulled from a couple of these are personal to me, but the rest have come from neurodivergent students that I am involved with. So there's either within my own program or within the BASWA special interest group for neurodiversity, where we have a student subgroup, and I'm the lead for that. So I just pull some up. So you can't have social needs if you're doing a social work programme. This was said to a neurodivergent student by a DSA assessor. Why do you have to be so difficult? You need to be more of a team player, and this was in relation to, well, it's actually been said for several different people, but the one that I'm thinking about was a social work student who was being raised as a concern in terms of not achieving PCF1, professionalism, because they didn't always seem to be involved in social activities with the team. I've got a book that could help, that you could read that might help you. This was said to a social work student, neurodivergent social work student, by another social work student when they chose to disclose that they were autistic and ADHD. Oh wow, you're autistic. My friend's son has that. It's so hard for her. I'll just leave that one there. You aren't as bad as you think you are. Okay, so this one, this one was said to a neurodivergent student by someone in authority within their placement when they were describing something that had been really difficult and a sensory trauma for them that had really impacted on them for the rest of the day, and they had a lot of questions about it in terms of their own reflections, and that was the response. It was a team manager, just, you know. And this one was said to me by a CAMS lead when we were discussing a young person. And I had suggested that they'd been diagnosed autistic, and I had said, wouldn't it be great to have an autistic professional to be able to work with them, to connect, because they were refusing to work with people, to really help explore their needs. Yeah. And this was a practice educator to a neurodivergent student when they'd asked for some support in relation to their dyslexia. And this is the one that probably cuts pretty deep for a lot of neurodivergent people, because it implies there's something wrong with you. So I am going to pause for a second and just ask if there are any questions. Wow, none at the moment. Gosh, I've either bored you all to sleep, or or you're busy thinking. Oh no, there is. Sorry. Christine, hiya.
Yeah, sorry, I was deep in thought about what you'd said, and I'm on a bit of a time lapse, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I suppose questions for me is, how do we ensure that we don't give those sort of reactions? Because I think it's quite easy to sit here and go, oh, that's terrible, isn't that awful? But being open and honest, really, you know, I think it's really important that I say, as a practice educator, I really don't know everything. I certainly don't know everything, and I don't know where all the support systems are. So do you have any tips or guidance about, not how to give those reactions, because I hope I never would, but what to do to actually get that support around the person so you can offer them something meaningful?
absolutely. And we're coming to that in a wee bit. So I'm glad
sorry.
you're already thinking about it. No, that's brilliant. But I guess one of the things, and thank you for raising that, because it reminds me of, and this comes from 2005, so it's a bit old, but I guess it kind of just shows how, yeah, how we still have quite a way to go. But there was a paper done by Ray et al. 2005, and it was about, I call it the PEDS document, but it was looking at practice educators and disabled students in placements. And there were several kind of recommendations that they gave, and I'll read out a few in terms of the practice educators. And one of the things that they were really clear about, coming from, they'd interviewed students and practice educators, disability support providers, and from kind of the academic side, and also I'm trying to think who else. I think it was team managers as well. And they found that there was a lot of kind of misconceptions and things like that, but also that practice educators really needed kind of support from HR and from their kind of their organisation, their agency, in terms of just knowing what was out around and about for students. So you kind of had that there, and then and also training, but it was just kind of recognized that you were kind of expected to know everything, and obviously that's nigh on impossible, isn't it? So I guess when rather to try and as I said, we will kind of think about a few ways to kind of make sure you don't kind of fall into these kind of spaces. It's just to know that, or just to remember that it's not, you definitely have a responsibility in supporting your student, but it goes beyond you. And if you're not sure, you know, your HR department should be able, for example, in terms of supports that are around like assistive technology and stuff like that, should be able to be having conversations with you, or just where do I go when I'm not sure, who, you know, what can I access training for this? It's really important, all of these kinds of things, so that so that my awareness and acceptance levels are, you know, are high enough for me to have at least a sense generally of what that student might need, if I'm aware of their support needs before they start placement. And there's another thing, we'll get to that.
Yeah, sorry, that can be a major issue. I certainly just thinking about, you know, things, practice I've been involved in. It's not knowing, so you can't prepare, and then you end up having to react. And certainly when I'm thinking about the last situation I was involved in, I was very disappointed that there was very little, well, there was no support from the university whatsoever for the students or for myself as a practice educator. And I think that's got to be a bit of a tripartite relationship.
Absolutely, I would totally and utterly agree with them. You feel that you're not getting the information that you need to be challenging back to the university. But
also the students should actually be getting some support from them. The
yes,
university should be supporting them, because the placement is part of the course.
Exactly. So students should have, or if they don't have, they should get the opportunity to explore that as their individual learning support plan. If they haven't got that, you should be asking, and there's very clear need, you should be asking the question why that's not there. And I guess for you guys in placement, it is who is in your agency that can support you to challenge back and just say, hang on a minute, this is, you know, this needs to be a bit more robust at your end, because you're absolutely right, this is not all down to you. You know, equally, it's not all down to the university or the agency that's providing the academic things. So it's like, so how can you work together do that. And that's what Ray, etc., were saying as well. It really needs to be a consistent conversation all the way through that prior to and all the way through the student's placement. So if you feel that you don't have a lot of information, I would be challenging back, definitely, because there's no reason why, unless the student hasn't disclosed, and that then becomes slightly different, but that's why it needs to be a continual conversation rather than we've got the info, off you go, you know, get on with it kind of thing. You also need support from your agency, your local authority, around how you can be supported to support the student in placement too. And that's why I'd kind of suggested linking in with HR or within learning and development around, okay, so what does this mean for me as a practice educator? How am I going to be supported to most effectively do my role? Okay, am I okay to carry on? I see there's a few things in chat. Am I okay to kind of come back to the chat things in a wee minute? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, let's see if I can carry on. Right. So masking. This is what happens with a lot of neurodivergent people when needs aren't met and they're trying to maintain, and we keep it in the context of students, a placement, and things are just getting really overwhelming. We talk a lot about resilience in social work, don't we? A lot of the time, this isn't resilience that you're seeing, it's somebody masking what they really need to do with behaviours that enable them to fit into the environment. That can have a massive impact on a student's mental health, on a neurodivergent person's mental health, and how they can manage, basically. So I won't go into massive details. When I give you the slides, there's links. You can go in and delve into all of these kind of topics a bit more, because obviously we cannot capture all of this in the time that we've got. But it's just, if you think, wow, they're cracking on, they're doing so well, they might not be. So check in with them. Okay, so very quickly. This is the stuff when I've spoken with neurodivergent students, and I've got what's called the ND space, where I work, which I set up for neurodivergent students to come and just get some peer support and some advice on a regular basis. And these were the key themes that kind of came up in their experiences in placement, and masking was the top. There was experiencing trauma, and it really is trauma. I can't stress this, Laura. It's you just can't get away with it. Like you can't escape it on the day-to-day. But there's also things like how to seek support with a diagnosis, because there's lots of people questioning whether they were or weren't. You know, we ask all these students to do reflexive writing and everything, you know, so they really start unpicking their own identities. So it's how we're helping with that. But then there was also coping strategies. There was huge talk about internalized shame, feeling different, feeling excluded, and feeling misunderstood, and a real worry around disclosure. So we really need to be encouraging safe spaces for these guys. But the other things that we do, because we really want to be strengths-based, and we really should be valuing the strengths that neurodivergent people bring. So you make sure that we celebrate strengths and successes within that too. Okay, I have talked a lot, like a massive amount, and really, what I'm going to ask you to do is take 5 minutes, grab a cuppa, and reflect on everything that I have talked at you with for a wee bit so far. And then I was going to put you in a breakout room, but I realised that I've kind of gone a little over time at this section, so I won't do that at the moment. But so this is just kind of your own kind of reflections, but please, if you could go and do that, that would be great. And when we come back, I really want to to look at what this means in terms of kind of support for students, what you can do. Okay, so you don't need to end the session or anything, just your cameras are off, you're muted, so just go away for 5 minutes and have a wee think, have a drink, whatever you need to do. So if we come back at 22 minutes past, that would be great. Okay, I'm hoping that everyone is back. I'm just wanting to say before we move on Thank you to everyone who's written in the chat. There's loads. It's quite hard for me to to catch up on some things, but essentially, just summarising, I'm noting a wee bit of discussion around writing and really just some really thank you guys for sharing your own experiences and insight, and absolutely I encourage people to read the chat around the impact of correcting written work, yeah, and I'm hoping that as we go on for this next bit, you might get some ideas that writing isn't everything, and neither is speaking. So there's something around assessing capability in terms of PCFs, in terms of being a social worker, and you know how you can be a little bit more creative. Okay, I'm going to move on now, if that's okay. Right, here we are. So what do we mean by capability? Yeah, big one. Interesting, isn't it? So we're assessed against PCFs, which I'm not against at all. We need a structure, don't we? We need to know what's safe, effective, ethical and professional to ensure quality for those we work with. However, this sense of capability is not always viewed in a supportive fashion. It's also an incredibly subjective measure, isn't it? You know, how do we know what capability looks like? Yeah, what does professional look like? Yeah. So, it doesn't measure context. It doesn't measure how someone sought to achieve these standards. Okay, this is a very subjective, judgmental, if you like, way to assess how someone has achieved this. Okay, there's an assumption there's a level playing field, but if you're, and I guess I get you to think about, you know, what are you basing your standards on? You know, is it behavior that you assume everyone will do? Is it in an environment that you assume everybody has the same experience from? You know, what is it? What other factors are in play here? What are the questions that we need to ask ourselves, regardless of need or neurodiversity? My challenge here is that excellent practice doesn't have to be a uniform approach. You know, we strive to offer person-centered creative social work practice, don't we? So why are we not thinking in that way? Maybe we are. So a generalized assumption from me here. I'm encouraging you, and let's reframe that, to think in that kind of a way when we are assessing students. What does good enough look like, and against whose norms? So I would suggest that we break this down in with the 3 C's. So a C theme here: capability. We need to look at context, connection, and collaboration. What on earth do I mean by that? Okay, so in context, common experiences being shared by neurodivergent students, or professionals really, let's be honest. Disrupted thinking or concentration from being in a large, loud, open-spaced room. Think of these lovely open plan offices. There's an expectation to verbally contribute in a shared space a lot of the time. We think about student groups, presentations, all of these kinds of things. And whilst we can argue that all of these are skills that relate to different things that we do in social work practice, such as presenting in conferences and stuff like that, there's ways and means to support a student to be able to feel confident and capable of doing that in a professional capacity. So you need to think a little bit more carefully about that. And then the other thing is often there is no time to process. You know, what can you do differently in relation to a known need for a student where changing task or processing information requires more energy perhaps than the other students in the room. And the other thing in relation to context is a placement or a workday doesn't start from the office. Okay, you have to get ready. You have to leave the house. You're maybe taking public transport or you're driving, but you have to get there. And navigating all of this is really full on. So by the time your student gets to placement, they've maybe encountered and needed to process and deal with a heck of a lot of stuff that they then maybe need to recover from a little before they go into the next step, which is starting the day in the placement. Now I've included a couple of links here, and after today, when you get the slides, I'd encourage you to look at them, because they are artistic artists who are trying to represent the experience of sensory overwhelm when traveling. And the two are one is in a cafe and one is traveling. I think they're quite good, and given that there'll obviously be a lot of variance in how people experience that, I think these kind of capture the main kind of themes for me anyway. So yeah, I would encourage you to share that experience. Okay, so let me think of an example where context is relevant. So a student social worker finds they're able to attend to reading case notes or lengthy reports in a quiet space away from the team. And now it's noted by the team manager that the student never appears to be sitting with the team. That's the comment that's made to the practice educator. And rather than discussing with the student, the practice educator frames this as a concern and assumes that not sitting means not communicating. The student is flagged at risk of not meeting PCF1 professionalism with an action to sit more with their team. The student then struggles to retain lengthy pieces of information and to manage the noise levels and the sensory overload. They become more withdrawn. The practice educator notes a deterioration in their presentation, not engaging in discussion, and adds further evidence of concern. The student works later, starts earlier to try and manage the sensory overload. So they're coming in when it's quieter, leaving when everybody else has left to try and avoid that. The practice educator records this as difficulties in managing work boundaries and time management. So how could this be reframed? So let me try and reframe this for you. I'll try. There we go. So the student identifies that they need space. The practice educator works with the student to agree to identify space and time where this may be possible, and when being physically with the team is necessary. Okay, so for example, team meetings or group discussion. So setting a context to expectations enables shared meaning and understanding. The student can effectively manage their own and the team's expectations. They can demonstrate their skills effectively without a negative impact on themselves. The practice educator learns a different way of supporting the student effectively. The team learns that they too could effectively use space in their practice without minimising the sense of not being part of a team. And this becomes something that is openly discussed as a way of practice within the team. So that is an example where meeting a neurodivergent student's need could actually encourage inclusive practice beyond the student and get people thinking about their own needs, arguably self-care, within a really busy, stressful, complex social work environment. Makes sense? We kind of need to know what it looks like, don't we? So to understand context, you need to consider the physical environment, sensory environment, and the emotive context in which the neurodivergent student's experiencing their learning. Now, this could change daily, it could change weekly, it could change seasonally. Okay, so people who feel really hot in summer really struggle to concentrate, focus, for example. So it could depend on the weather or the number of people involved or the nature of the task. Now, sometimes this may need to have assigned assistive technology. But please cannot assume that this means it will work or that it meets all needs. So when I talk about assistive technology, it could be speech to text or text to speech system software that could be used. It could be screen filters. There could be a few different things that a student may need. But different packages work differently for different people, and if that package is not helping them, it actually can be more problematic. So if you haven't got access to any packages, that's a real problem. And that is something that your organisation really needs to look at. But I guess my big thing here is saying, don't assume just because something has been added to somebody's laptop that need has been met. Okay, so if needs change, then we need to kind of review that too. So the other question, and I do call these curiosity questions because I guess that's what we're fostering here, is what do you need to change? You know, what is it that you need to do that needs to change? What is it that you can do differently? We're kind of pulling into that double empathy problem a bit here as well, aren't we? You know, it's not all on the student. Okay. So that brings me to connection. And I guess I'm pulling on not just curiosity, but cultural humility as well. Okay, so it's really having that motivation to get in and connect with and understand that identity of your student, and all the intersected elements within that. What does that mean for them? You know, this is not a homogenized approach. All people with dyslexia don't need the same things, you know, or the same things are not helpful for them. Not all autistic people are going to want the same kinds of supports. They're just not. And a lot of us have a real Woolies kind of pick and mix of different elements of neurodivergence that really love to collide with each other sometimes, you know. So yeah, it's very much an individualized approach. But it also needs to be a strengths-based approach. So please start with that foundation of presuming competence. This is a person who can, if they're given the opportunity to. All right. And if they can't, you've given them all that they need to be able to do the job. There's something else that's getting in the way. You know, that may be that social work isn't for them. But you need to make sure that you have exhausted absolutely everything else before you can assume that it's anything but competent in terms of social work. Kind of going back to that thing about shared meaning and understanding, absolutely, you really need to kind of, that time and patience here are equally key. You know, this is not something that's going to happen quickly. Well, it might, but I guess it's just be prepared to really kind of shift and change in your positioning as you go in trying to connect with and develop the working relationship with the student. They're going to hold a lot of key information for you. And then I guess this thing about, and it kind of comes back to the writing, different ways of communicating. It does not, you know, not everybody really wants to kind of unpick and explore different kinds of things through talking in terms of developing their own learning. Equally, how people behave, making assumptions of what that means, please don't. Please try and explore with the student. Ask them. It's the more you say, what approach do we use? Ask. Just ask. What does that mean for you? You know, what is it that is helpful that I've just done here, or what's been unhelpful? Writing is great, but But, you know, does it have to always be the narrative? Can bullet points be our friend? You know, can we chunk things down a bit? That would be great. And then, is there any other ways that we can communicate? Symbols, pictures, you know, that may sound incredibly simplistic, but actually, if we think about flowcharts and diagrams and things like that, in terms of trying to explain process or kind of reflections and sharing, you know, symbolism it can be really, really powerful. I mean, we think about if we're working with young people in cartooning, for example, you know, and how effective that can be. You know, think it's about being creative in our ways to connect and communicate and find some shared ground in terms of meaning and understanding is really, really valuable and will offer great dividends, I guess, in terms of your relationship with your disabled student. So yeah, and I guess what other solutions have we got? Well, I'm asking you to apply a critical eye to theory, as well as research and approaches that we use. So thinking about, and this is in relation to, I guess, there's a lot of things around child development and also how people learn, things like that are really very much kind of located in kind of white middle class male child kind of participants and not really looking at adult learners, for example. Oh my goodness, if we want to think about attachment, for example, as a theory, just generally, you know, it's a really good example of, you know, how well does that translate into difference, you know. So, and I guess it's kind of bias checking. Have regular bias checks with yourself, you know. You know, am I being curious here, or am I jumping to the easy option or the obvious option because it's less hassle because I'm so busy, you know, that kind of thing. Who are the experts in the room, in the thinking, in the narrative? Who do you need to be listening to? And whose norm is it anyway? You know, what are we basing all of our assessments and observations on? So doing what you're doing today is fantastic. So making better use of experts by experience, that's me. In training, for example, and just getting to know your knowledge base and sources within the kind of neurodivergent community. I'll have some links for you on these slides, for example, to just go and delve into different aspects of neurodivergence, and just expand your knowledge. But also, if you're designing any learning, whether that's written, PowerPoint, or whatever, can you just double check that it's fully inclusive? Does your learning and development team or sector have anything that could support you with that? Is there anything that you could support them with in relation to that? Who knows? But also considering sensory factors in that too. Milton et al. Is a paper that is got some really good stuff in there that you might want to look at if that interests you. Okay. Supervision is your tool. It really is. This is the safe space for students to talk about what's going on for them. So these are just some questions that I'll be asking you to think about. Is the purpose clear for supervision? You got it. Is the space safe? Who holds the power? How can you negotiate that? How can you kind of agree in terms of mutual connection? Make sure people are planned, feel prepared. Be aware that some people need more time to process a question. And then just things like stimming toys sounds funny, doesn't it? But it's fidget toys, really. It's the things to help people in terms of their attention and focus. That can be really helpful sometimes. It's not fidgeting or not paying attention. It's the opposite, actually. And then value that learning space and model that. That could be really impactful for a neurodivergent student to see their practice educator modelling really inclusive and curious spaces. Okay, and this is a little bit on collaboration. I'm really aware of time, and I've talked loads, which I apologise for, because I really wanted you to do a little bit of going into breakout groups, but I'm not sure that we're going to have time to do. So I'm going to rush this little bit, which I apologise for. I'm hoping that the slides speak for themselves. Oh yes, this is a little thing in terms of I just want to show you this example before we do. So let's see if this works. So this is what a student wrote in terms of how their dyspraxia, what their dyspraxia means for them and what they wanted their practice educator to know. So they've kind of separated it into the sensory in terms of coordination, because coordination is a huge aspect of dyspraxia. I mean, I love her thing that says ring binders, zip files, filing cabinets, and Polly Pockets are allowed to get me. they can't kind of manage them, so need a little bit of extra time, and can we not use them, please? You know. But it's just some ideas on a way to try and kind of come to a collaborative kind of either a plan or a shared understanding of what you know, what their experiences are and what you can maybe think about in terms of what they need. And yeah, so let me just see if I can close it. There we go. Good. I'll send you that as well, Deborah. I'll send that to you afterwards. That you can maybe send people to just have a little look at. And then just thinking about ASYE and beyond. And you're really, if you support your neurodivergent students in an inclusive way and have neurodiversity as a lens through which you look through things, you really are empowering them into ASYE and beyond. You really are acting as an ally within the profession, and I, for one, really value that. Okay, so here's the other thing is we're gonna I guess it's just thinking broader. Let's think systemically here, okay? Just think about, do you have any neurodivergent spaces in your organization for students? Would that be something that would be helpful for them in terms of peer support? You know, and you know, do you have an equality, diversity, and inclusion working group or lead? You know, who can maybe kind of take the neurodiversity beyond you, you know, and support you as well. And then just to say that there is a neurodiversity special interest group with BASWA if you have students or you yourself are interested in neurodivergent. And then absolutely unashamed plugging by myself. I've written a social working with autistic people booklet that has some advice in that. If people are interested, I can send out a copy of that too. So my challenge to you, and we were going to do this in breakout rooms, but I've spoken too much. Info dumping, I think. Don't think I achieved what I wanted to, so 100% then. But and this is brave space stuff. If we're not able to do it today, but I would love you to go away and think about this, please, and then take it to supervision with your line manager, okay? I'd like to think about what would you will commit to do or change around inclusive neurodiversity practice? How will you achieve accountability for change? How are you going to own that change? And what do you need? Oh, spelling mistake, sorry. What do you need to achieve that? Okay. I'd love you to do that. And any feedback for afterwards would be fantastic, I have to say. So we have just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to stop sharing now, if that's okay. But if we have time, Deborah, I don't know if we do, for a couple of questions.
I think so. We have another session that starts now.
Oh,
In another session. So I think I'm going to have to kind of formally close it to allow people who are going to that session to be able to leave and join. And I will obviously need to join as well to introduce that session. But if you're happy, to stay on, if other people have questions, that's absolutely fine. But I do need to say, a really big thank you to you, because I know you've seen it as info dump, but I think for us it's been, and I speak for myself anyway, that it's been really useful, and there aren't many places we can get this kind of information from, especially when there's a lived experience perspective as well. So thank you so much for that. So I will stop the recording and close the session, and I'm going to pop off, but I'll be in touch, and obviously we will share